Hi, I'm Elise. Grew up with a silver spoon, you could say, but never really cared for it. I always felt more at home helping out at the charity than sitting in some board meeting. So, when my buddy Casey invited me up to a no-frills cabin in the mountains for the weekend, I was all in. Little did I know, this trip would turn my world upside down. The cabin was rustic, no running water, electricity, and maybe on a good day. Casey's crew was a mix, people from all walks, but Tom stood out. He was a manager at some small-time company, nothing flashy, but he had this easy way about him. The first evening was a hoot. We were all huddled around the fire pit, the cold mountain air biting at our noses, when Tom started showing his chops. He'd already gathered firewood by the time I arrived, and there he was, setting up the fire like it was second nature. "You ever start a fire before, Elise?" he asked with a smirk. "Only the figurative kind," I shot back, grinning. Everyone chuckled. Tom laughed. "Well, tonight's a good night to learn the literal kind, then." As the fire crackled to life, Tom took charge of dinner. We had a bunch of random ingredients, and I swear the guy was a magician. With a couple of pans and the fire, he whipped up something that smelled like heaven. "How'd you learn to cook like this?" I asked, genuinely curious as I watched him stir the pot. "Mom was a chef," he replied without looking up. "Picked up a thing or two watching her." "You cook?" "Only if pouring cereal counts." He chuckled, stirring the pot. "Guess we won't starve this weekend." Dinner was a blast. The food was simple but delicious, and the company was even better. We all told stories, laughed, and the hours slipped by like minutes. Tom was the life of the party, but not in an over-the-top way. He just had this vibe that made you feel like you were in the right place. Later that night, as we sat by the fire, the group thinned out, heading to bed, and soon it was just Tom and I, the crackle of the fire keeping us company. "So, Elise, what brings someone like you out here? Not exactly a glitzy weekend getaway," he teased. I needed a break from all the glitz, honestly. Plus, Casey promised me a good time, hard to say no to that. Tom nodded, poking the fire. "Yeah, it's nice to get away from it all. No distractions, just the essentials." "That's exactly it. It's refreshing, you know? Being out here, it's real in a way that fancy dinners and city lights just aren't." We talked into the night, the fire dying down to embers. It was easy, talking to Tom. He didn't care who my dad was or how much money I had. He just saw me, just Elise. After that mountain trip, things with Tom moved fast, like, super fast. It wasn't just a fling kindled by firelight and starry skies, it was real. We clicked on every level, and before I knew it, we were talking about a future together. It was wild how natural it felt. Tom popped the question on a chilly Sunday morning. We were at my place, having just finished a breakfast of scrambled eggs and toast, my attempt at cooking, which was decent at best. He looked a bit nervous, which wasn't like him at all. He kept fidgeting with the salt shaker, pushing it around the table, before finally stopping and looking straight at me. "Elise, I've been thinking. A lot, actually. About us." I smirked, wiping my hands on a napkin. "That sounds serious. Should I be worried?" He laughed, that easy laugh that always made me feel like everything was right in the world. "No, no worries. Just, well, here goes nothing." And that's when he got down on one knee, right there in my not-so-spacious kitchen, with the smell of burnt toast still lingering a bit. "Elise, will you marry me?" It was so straightforward, no frills or dramatic gestures, just him and me, and a simple question that felt like the biggest thing in the world. I didn't even hesitate. "Yes, Tom. Of course, yes." Fast forward to meeting his parents, Martha and Joe. We drove up to their house, a cozy little place with a garden out front that looked like it took more than a bit of work to keep up. Tom had told me they were simple folks, nothing fancy about them, and he wasn't kidding. Martha opened the door, and her smile was as warm as a summer day. "Tommy. And you must be Elise. We've heard so much about you." She pulled me into a hug like we were long-lost friends. Inside, Joe was just as welcoming, though a bit more reserved. He shook my hand with a firm grip that matched his stern look, but his eyes twinkled a bit as he did. "Good to finally meet you, Elise. Tommy's told us a lot." We sat down to dinner, and that's when the real conversation started. Martha served up a homemade lasagna that was absolutely to die for, and between bites, the chat flowed. "So, Elise, Tommy says you work with a charity? That's quite noble of you," Joe commented, passing me the garlic bread. "Yeah, it's something I'm passionate about. It's not about money for me, just helping where I can," I replied, trying to sound as down-to-earth as possible. Martha chimed in, her voice full of curiosity. "That's wonderful, dear. It's rare to see young folks so dedicated to good causes these days." The dinner moved on to lighter topics, but as we were clearing the table, Tom's mom pulled me aside. Her tone was a mix of sincere and something else, maybe caution. "Elise, we're just simple people here. Tom's happiness is what matters to us. You make him happy, right?" I was taken aback a bit by the directness. "Yes, Martha. Making each other happy is what we're all about." She nodded, seemingly satisfied with that answer, and patted my hand. "Good, good. Just keep that boy smiling." As Tom and I left later that night, I couldn't help but feel like I'd passed some kind of test. But more than that, I felt an immense pressure lift off my shoulders. His parents weren't just okay with me, they genuinely seemed to like me. Introducing Tom to my parents was a different story. Dad's always had this way of sizing people up, and Mom's no pushover either. They were polite, sure, but there was a stiffness in the air. Dad gave Tom the kind of look that could either warm you up or freeze you solid, depending on his mood. "So, Tom, Elise tells us you manage a small team." Dad started during dinner, his voice casual, but with an edge that could cut glass. Tom handled it well, though. "Yes, sir. It's a modest operation, but we get the job done. I enjoy the challenge." Mom watched quietly, her eyes sharp but not unkind. "That's good to hear. Elise has always been driven to make a difference. We hope you two support each other." They made their point without making a scene. They were cautious, maybe even a bit skeptical, but they didn't object. They just wanted me to be happy, and that was enough for them to give us their blessing. So, we got married, and moved into this cozy, modern apartment downtown that Dad helped us secure. It was a big step, starting a new life together in a place that was all ours, well, sort of. But it felt right, like the beginning of something truly great. Living in our new apartment was like a dream at first. Tom and I had space to ourselves, decorating it with a mix of his taste and mine, nothing too fancy, but cozy enough for both of us. It was our little world. But soon, visits from Tom's parents, Martha and Joe, became more frequent. At first, I thought nothing of it, they were family after all. It started innocently enough. I wanted to make a good impression, so I bought a few nice things for their home, maybe a new coffee maker or some fancy kitchen gadgets. One Sunday, they came over for lunch, and I showed them the espresso machine I'd picked up for them. Martha's eyes lit up. "Oh, Elise, that's too much," she exclaimed, but her hands were all over it, checking every button and feature. Joe grinned, patting my shoulder. "You're spoiling us, Elise. What have we done to deserve this?" I laughed it off. "It's nothing, really. Just saw it and thought of you guys." That should have been the end of it, but it wasn't. The next time they came over, Martha pulled me aside, her voice low. "You know, Elise, our TV has been acting up. Nothing like your lovely flat screen here." I caught Tom's eye, looking for some kind of sign, but he just shrugged slightly. I didn't mind helping out, so I nodded. "Sure, I'll look into it for you." It wasn't long before I found myself buying them a new TV. It felt good to make them happy, and their thanks were always effusive, almost too much. But then, the requests started to get more specific. We were having dinner at their place when Joe brought it up. Elise, you've been so kind with the gifts. There's actually something specific we've been needing. Our old mattress is just killing our backs. I glanced at Tom, who seemed uncomfortable but said nothing. I sighed, a bit of annoyance creeping in. Okay, send me the details, and I'll see what I can do. From there, it spiraled. Every visit or call seemed to come with a new hint or outright request. Elise, the winter's coming, and our house could really use some new insulation. Or Elise, have you seen those new smart fridges? They're fascinating. Each time, I felt a bit more used, but I pushed those feelings down. They were Tom's parents, after all, and I wanted to keep the peace. The morning I found out about my dad's company going bankrupt was like any other, until it wasn't. I was sipping my coffee, scrolling through the news on my phone, when the headline hit me like a ton of bricks. I remember the cold feeling in my stomach as I read about the financial troubles, the bankruptcy filings, everything tumbling down. I called Dad immediately. His voice was calm, but I could hear the strain behind it. Elise, it's bad. I didn't want to worry you until I had to. I was shocked. But, what's going to happen now? What about us? We'll get through it, sweetheart. But things are going to change. You might need to tighten up a bit until we figure things out. The reality of it didn't hit until I had to break the news to Tom. He was getting ready for work, and I caught him just as he was about to leave. Tom, we need to talk. It's about my dad's company. He frowned, sensing the seriousness. What's up? Something wrong? I took a deep breath. His company went bankrupt. It's all over the news. We're going to have to make some big changes around here. Tom's reaction was a mix of concern and disbelief. Wow, are you okay? What's going to happen with the apartment? And everything else? I don't know yet, I admitted, feeling lost. We need to figure things out, but we'll probably have to move somewhere cheaper. Cut back on a lot of things. The following weeks were a whirlwind of adjustments. We started looking for cheaper apartments, cutting down on all our expenses. It was during this time that I noticed a shift in Tom's demeanor. He became quieter, more distant. One evening, as we were going over our budget, he snapped. Can't believe we have to count every penny now. This isn't how I thought things would be. I was taken aback by his tone. I know it's tough, but it's not like I planned any of this. We just have to deal with it together. Yeah, well, it's easy for you to say. You've never had to worry about money before, he retorted sharply. His words stung, and I felt a rift growing between us. But things got even worse when we had to move in with his parents. The welcome was warm at first, but the house felt smaller with each passing day, cramped and filled with tension. Martha and Joe's attitude started to change too. Martha joined in one day when I was doing the dishes. Elise, maybe you should cut back on the hot water. Bills aren't cheap, Her words were casual, but they cut deep. Of course, Martha. I'll make sure to be more mindful. Living there became a daily reminder of our situation. The comments about saving money, about how we were now dependent on them, chipped away at my pride and my relationship with Tom. Feeling the pressure, I finally decided to leave the charity foundation and picked up a job. But even with the extra income, it wasn't enough. Tom's patience wore thin, and his temper grew short. One night, after a particularly tough day, he exploded. Can't you see we're drowning here, Elise? And all you do is add to the weight. I was stunned, tears stinging my eyes. I'm trying my best, Tom. It's not like I want this life for us. His parents were no help either. They started seeing me as a freeloader, someone just taking advantage of their goodwill. At dinner, Joe would pass snide remarks. Hope you appreciate this meal, Elise, since you're eating our food in our house. Each word was a jab, each look a reminder that I was an outsider now. It was clear I was no longer a daughter-in-law, but an unwanted guest who had overstayed her welcome. Martha's birthday was supposed to be a small family celebration at a nice local restaurant. Just me, Tom, and his folks. A chance to put aside the tensions and just enjoy a meal together. That's what I thought anyway. We got to the restaurant, and it was fancier than I expected. I felt a bit out of place, but I tried to keep up a good face for Tom's sake. We all sat down, and the waiter handed out menus. I noticed right away that mine looked different from everyone else's, a lot thinner. When I opened it, it was clearly some sort of budget menu. Confused, I looked up, catching Tom's sneering glance. He quickly looked away, not wanting to meet my eyes. "What's this?" I asked, holding up the flimsy menu. Martha, ever the peacekeeper, or so she seemed, chimed in with a laugh. "Oh, we thought that would be more suitable for you, dear. We have to watch our expenses, after all." Joe snickered and added, "Yeah, consider it part of your new budget plan. No room for the fancy stuff anymore." I felt my cheeks burn as I looked down at the options, just some salads and a soup. Meanwhile, they were all eyeing the steaks and seafood dishes. The waiter came around to take our orders, and as each of them ordered dishes with prices that made my head spin, the sting grew sharper. When it came to my turn, I could barely speak through the lump in my throat. "Just the soup, please," I muttered, wishing I could disappear into my seat. As the dinner went on, their jokes and laughter about their lavish meals felt like jabs. I tried to keep up some semblance of dignity, but then Tom dropped the real bomb. "Enjoy your simple dinner, Elise. You know, since you're more of a freeloader these days," he said, laughing like it was the funniest joke in the world. The table erupted in laughter, but it sounded cruel to my ears. I couldn't hold back anymore. "Funny you should say that, Tom," I snapped, my voice rising despite myself. "You didn't seem to mind my freeloading when I was footing the bill for dinners like this, or buying your parents whatever they asked for." The laughter stopped abruptly. The restaurant had gone quiet, and I realized we'd attracted the attention of other diners. Some even had their phones out, capturing this lovely family moment. Joe's face went red, and Martha's mouth snapped shut. Tom just stared, his smirk fading. "You know what? This isn't funny. Not at all," I continued, my voice shaking. "You enjoyed my generosity when it suited you. But now, when I'm down, this is how you treat me. Like I'm less than you?" Nobody had an answer. They just sat there, the color draining from their faces as they realized just how public our confrontation had gotten. "I think I've had enough birthday celebration for one night," I said coldly, pushing back from the table. I didn't wait for a response. I just walked out, the sound of my heels sharp against the restaurant floor, leaving them to their expensive dishes and their newfound silence. I drove straight to my parents' house, the place I'd always considered my true home. It was late when I arrived, but they were still up, probably sensing that something was wrong. I found my dad in the living room, reading, and my mom was there knitting something that looked like it was meant to be a scarf. The moment I stepped in, they both looked up, concern etching their faces. "What's wrong, Elise?" my mom asked right away, her knitting needles pausing midair. I sighed, feeling the weight of the last few weeks finally starting to lift as I began to explain everything. From the financial troubles with Dad's company to how things had turned sour with Tom and his parents. Dad's brows furrowed as he listened. "They did what at the dinner?" he asked, his voice rising slightly in disbelief and anger. "It was awful, Dad," I admitted, my voice cracking a bit from the stress. "They basically called me a freeloader in front of everyone at the restaurant." Tom laughed along with his parents. Mom shook her head, setting her knitting aside. "That's no way to treat family. Or anyone, for that matter." Dad got up from his chair, his expression stern. "You know, I always had a feeling that boy and his parents might turn out to be trouble. They seemed a bit too eager when things were good." I nodded, sinking down onto the couch. I guess I wanted to believe the best in them. I was wrong. The next day, I made the decision to leave Tom for good. I went back to our shared apartment, well, his parents' house now, to gather my things. I wasn't sure what to expect, but I knew I had to be firm. Tom and Martha were there when I arrived. The air was thick with tension as soon as I stepped through the door. "There she is, the impudent girl who made a scene at the dinner," Martha muttered loud enough for me to hear, her tone dripping with disdain. I ignored her and headed straight to the bedroom to pack my things. Tom leaned against the doorway, watching with a grin as I folded my clothes and placed them into boxes. "You know, I was thinking of preparing the divorce papers. Come back in a week to sign them." His words were meant to sting, but I felt a strange sense of relief instead. "That's fine. I'll be here." Dad had some news when I got back. "Elise, about the company. I've managed to sort out some of the mess. We're not out of the woods yet, but there's a plan." That bit of news lifted my spirits further. "Really, Dad? That's great." A week had passed since I promised Tom I'd be back to sign the divorce papers. Tomorrow was waiting for me in the living room, papers laid out on the coffee table, his expression indifferent. Without a greeting, he just nodded towards the documents. "Here they are," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. I didn't say a word, I just took a seat and started signing. I could feel the eager eyes of his parents on me, barely containing their glee. As I signed the last page, Martha couldn't hold back any longer. "Well, I must say, it's a relief to finally get rid of the freeloader," she snickered, glancing at Joe, who nodded in agreement. Joe laughed, adding fuel to the fire. "Yeah, and quite the show, watching the rich girl turn into a beggar. Quite the entertainment." Their words stung, but I wasn't about to give them the satisfaction of seeing me hurt. Instead, I smiled, the calm before the storm. I reached into my bag and pulled out the latest issue of a well-known business magazine, flipping it open to a highlighted article. "This should be entertaining, then," I said, tossing the magazine onto the table. It landed open on the page featuring a headline about my father's company overcoming its financial crisis and now projecting even greater profits than before. Their laughter died in their throats as they read the headline. I watched as the color drained from their faces, their satisfaction turning to shock, then to panic. Tom picked up the magazine, his eyes scanning the words as if hoping to find something that would contradict what was right in front of him. "Elise, wait, I stood up, my chair scraping back sharply. "Save it, Tom. You and your parents showed your true colors. It's funny, isn't it? Just when you thought you had seen my downfall, it turns out you pushed away the cash cow." Martha and Joe were speechless, their mouths opening and closing like fish out of water. I didn't wait around to hear any excuses or pleas. Walking to my car, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I was free from their greed and manipulation, ready to move forward without them. The next morning, I sat at the breakfast table with my dad, discussing my next steps. He was reading the newspaper, but his attention shifted fully to me when I started talking about my plans. "So, what's the plan, Elise? What's next for you?" he asked, his tone serious, but supportive. "I'm thinking of joining the company, Dad. I want to be part of building it back up," I said, feeling a surge of purpose. Dad looked up, surprise and pride evident in his expression. "Really? That's a big step, kiddo. You sure you're up for it?" I nodded confidently. "Absolutely. I've been on the sidelines long enough. It's time I stepped in and helped steer the ship." Later that day, I went to the office to start my new role. The buzz of activity and the sense of purpose in the air were invigorating. I met with several team leaders, discussing strategies and upcoming projects. Everyone was welcoming, and their enthusiasm was contagious. Unexpectedly, the past tried to claw its way back into my life. Tom started calling me, his voice tentative, suggesting we try to start over. "Elise, I've been thinking, maybe we could." "No, Tom," I cut him off firmly each time. "There's no starting over for us. I'm moving forward, not backward." And then there were the messages from his parents, suddenly overflowing with regrets and pleas for me to reconsider, to come back to their son. "We know things got a bit out of hand, but we're family," they wrote, trying to tug at my heartstrings. I read the messages, each word strengthening my resolve, and replied with a categorical refusal. No. I wish you all the best, but I will not be coming back. Each refusal I sent out felt like another step forward, a step towards a future where I no longer defined myself through the lens of others' expectations but through my own ambitions and dreams. With each day that passed, I was more certain that the hardest decisions often lead to the greatest freedoms.